Thank you, and it's an honor and a pleasure to give the talk. So thank you again, and maybe next time in person. Um, so uh, just to indicate to the audience that the currency of research advancement is publication. My university boss says that, and what we call in Canada the Office of Vice President of Research, and the I is innovation. And I want to mention that because oftentimes I think the VPRI are not particularly innovative, not just at my institution, but broadly speaking. My experience is they're typically a very conservative group of people. But am I pointing the finger at my university boss or the higher echelons of the university because it's just unique? Absolutely not. So what we see here is when we went to look at over 100 institutions to sort of see how do people get promoted. And the way they get promoted is by publishing, 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 publishing. And it even goes so far as to the journal, because when we submitted this manuscript, we had traditional criteria, and here we had progressive criteria. But the journal said, no, 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 we can't use that word. So I asked them why. Well, we can't make a judgment. Maybe they're not progressive, which I found totally weird. Anyhow, what you see is at every stage of getting promoted, it's all about very traditional publication, publication, publication. And we're in the middle of updating this paper. And what I can tell you, the early results suggest actually very little change. Research organizations rarely change. And if you looked at the November 7th issue of Nature, what you see is the same old story, publish or perish. There's definitely a very serious problem, and it's getting more serious over time. If you look at different parts of the world, it's a serious issue. So it doesn't appear to be going away. So it's not just my institution. It seems it's similar institutions right around the world. And uh, not to make fun of anything, but I was at a funeral some time ago, and I went and I saw this um, tombstone, and the QR code was to the person's publications list. So people take this to their death, so to speak, which I was a little bit surprised at. Anyway, so this is me. I have one of these every single year. They ask me, how many publications have I had? What is the journal impact factor? And of course, what is the H index? And what I wanted to share with you is that neither the JIF nor the H index are evidence-based. A little peculiarity of my institution is they're always asking for the M quotient and the M index. I have probably told them 10 times they're both the same thing. But because I have little credibility, it's still here 10 years later. And every time they say the same thing, and I've just said nothing else. So in terms of when I say they're not evidence-based, what I mean is if I have twice as many publications as the person in the next office, does it make me twice as good a researcher? Not at all. There's no evidence for that. If my articles are published in a higher journal impact factor journal, am I better? I don't know. There's quite a lot of conflicting evidence about that. In terms of citations, if I have twice as many citations as the person in the next office, does that make me twice as good as a researcher? I don't think we have too much evidence to support that. In terms of grants, which most institutions are interested in, they're interested in, all the bigger money. But if I do meta research, it's obviously going to be considerably cheaper than if I do an RCT. Does that make me less worthy of a researcher? I don't think there's any evidence to support that. And we see that my institution and institutions around the world continue to, in a sense, ignore evidence when it suits them. And I wanted to share with you sort of two stories that, in my experience, really speak to this fact. The first one is Atul Gayawandi, who wrote a book called Being Mortal. And I would say that in the area of palliative care, this book has had a profound impact. This was never published as an article. There's nothing in any journal about being mortal. It's simply a book he wrote. And then the person on the right, who sadly passed away last year, is Peter Higgs. And Peter Higgs created the Higgs boson particle. I wish I was a physicist and that I felt comfortable to explain to you what that is. But Peter Higgs wrote some very nice work and how he felt about being at the University of Edinburgh for much of his life, and how embarrassed he felt about walking down the corridors thinking, I've only published 5 or 6 papers in my lifetime. What must my colleagues think of me? I don't deserve to be here. But obviously, Peter Higgs was quite important because he won the Nobel Prize for Physics. And again, very, very few publications, and he felt very, very bad about that. And his work on the Higgs boson was obviously very theoretical, and it took 50 years for anybody to sort of confirm this. And in those 50 years, he published very, very little, but obviously succeeded. So this is sort of to show you that publications don't always mean a whole lot in terms of traditional academic promotion, evaluation, career aspirations. And I would encourage you to have a look at this book. It's important because I would say that every year when one of these rankings come out, particularly in North America, the US News and World Report, it's simply on every newspaper. And if a certain university gets a high ranking, it's in all the local, national newspapers. And what we see now today, being the 17th of November, I think in the past 2 weeks, the Web of Science has released their top 1%. And every day in my news feed, such a university says, oh, we have 4 people in the top rankings, we have 10 people in the top ranking, and every day. So it's very, very interesting that people are interested in this sort of ranking system. And I don't have too much time today, but another time I could come back and talk to you about is the ranking system, how is it actually made up, and is it evidence-based? And I think the answer to the evidence is not so much. And there is a European Commission report that I just wanted to sort of highlight a couple of points here. The conclusion is actually simple. an unlimited quest for rankings. The ranking imperative affects all levels of the research structures. It tends to constrain change for nearly all of the actors. And I think that's so, so true. I have never been able to get my institutions to think, is there something else we could think about besides ranking? So my assessment does not include whether I've practiced responsible conduct and research. And okay, well, why is that important? Well, this is why it's important. A simple, beautiful study. They simply looked at reports of 67 randomized trials published in a 6-week interval in six, what we might call prestige journals. And what they found is that there were, in those 67 trials, there were problems in 58 of them. And I would say just to you, in terms of responsible conduct of research, to me, this is a very important result. 365 novel outcomes, which didn't exist previously in the protocol. So that's not a very responsible conduct of research. And I think at the bigger picture, a book that I have recently read is called Doctored. And I wanted to mention it because it goes beyond a simple problem with 67 trials. This looks at a whole area of neuroscience. And it was written by this guy, Charles Piller, who's an investigative journalist at Science. And the only reason he was able to write it was because of Matthew Schrag. Matthew was a whistleblower, and it took them 2 years to get trust for one another. Matthew Schrag identified some very serious problems. The biggest problem that is related to the responsible conduct of research, that almost all of the randomized trials that have been done to date for Alzheimer's disease are totally unethical. They should never have been done. The evidence base underpinning those trials was totally fabricated. And that's my story, or one of my stories, about being having responsible conduct of research. And I would ask all of you, does your place of employment require you to take a course? Not ask you, not recommend, but require you to take a course in research integrity. And in my experience, I've been very blessed to travel around the world. Very, very, very few institutions actually require you to take that. They seem to think, oh, you have an MD, you have a PhD, you have both, you must know how to do research appropriately. Not so much. And my assessment doesn't ask anything about whether I've included patient partners. And we see here at least 2 studies, Michelle Mello and Yukon Kim have quite clearly shown that patients want their data shared, patients want to be involved in research from the very beginning. And I think that is very, very important. My assessment doesn't include whether I've shared data and code associated with any of my publications. Again, mandated in although it's mandated in Canada, I just want to make that point again, my institution doesn't care about it. And here is CIHR, is the Canadian Institute of Health Research. It's our primary federal funder in Canada for biomedical research. And they at least have a policy for open science, which includes data sharing. And what we did is a little study. We looked at approximately 300 job advertisements, and we looked to see, is there any mention of open science in the job advertisements? And what we found is that absolutely not. Almost never mentioned. And so even though there's mandates about it, it doesn't seem to have happened. So I also wanted to highlight a paper that Florian led, looking at data sharing, and I think the story is not so much. And I think here's another very nice example of people in almost 1,800 manuscripts sort of saying, oh yeah, we'll share the data, indicating data availability on request, which by the way is not data sharing. Data sharing would mean you could actually simply go and get it. The bottom line is that almost again, nobody shares their data. So again, I'm not assessed on that. Whether I've registered my research, mandated again in Canada, I'm not assessed on it. And we know that Canadians don't do it. Having looked at approximately 6,700 randomized trials, what we found is that about 40% of those trials were inappropriately registered or not registered at all. And again, this is another paper, a policy piece about data deposit. So we have a policy coming into place that will mandate data deposit, but our government will not allow us to have a budget line item to share data, because sharing data doesn't come from the sky. It actually requires some physical work. And I would say in the institutions that I work in, even if every single person wanted to do it, I would say 10% would actually know how to do it. 90% would need help. That's going to cost some money. So if you want a policy to fail out of the blocks, the way to do it is not allow people to put a budget line item to share their data. And I just wanted to also mention that if people don't share their data, it is at times difficult to look at the issue of reproducibility. And this is a reproducibility issue in psychological science. And these authors try to take 100 what were considered very important studies, and they try to replicate it. And what they found is that the mean estimate of effect was reduced about 50%. That's a problem. And if we don't share data, it's going to make it increasingly difficult to have a look at this issue, despite there being reproducibility networks all around the world. And I think here is simply just another example that we actually looked at reproducibility across different areas, and it's still a problem. And so again, the importance of being able to share data comes to the top. But there are perhaps some solutions. One is DORA, which is the Declaration of Research Assessment. And they're doing some innovative work. And although it's an international organization, I think it's mostly focused on Europe, is Quora, which is another organization that is trying to do a lot of good work. And DORA and Quora are trying to collaborate and coordinate on how to move forward with research assessment. We've looked at this in trying to see, could we sort of bring research integrity into research assessment, and we came with the Hong Kong principles. So there's lots of groups who are trying to do things, and there are a few organizations that are starting to think think outside the box, thinking about other ways to assess researchers. For example, we developed a checklist, a checklist internally for a projects. I'm on a very large research program that the University of Ottawa received $100 million. Believe me, the $100 million is not for me. But anybody who does work within that program, they use this checklist that we developed, and it tries to sort of bring issues of open science, research integrity to their attention. And anything that we're involved with in this big program is sent to the PI, and they have to use this. And sort of moving more towards what is open science. And open science is, I think, practically the transparency and openness promotion guidance. The top folk have done a lot of work on this. They first produced TOP in 2015, and then in 2025, okay, yeah. They also did a lot of 2.0, let's just say. And these were practices that journals and publishers should consider important with every study that's come through to them. And this is important because TOP has been endorsed by thousands of journals and publishers. And so at one level, they may have credibility. And what I just put this up for maybe many learners are interested in open science. This is probably the best course I've ever taken. It's free, although now that I put it up here, I'm not sure in the current administration whether they still have it, but they may. And if you're interested in open science, I would encourage you to take it. It's a fabulous course, and we've done some work trying to take this the TOP. We're trying to push it towards research performing organizations, and we've done a series of background work such as scoping review. We've done Delphi, and then we held a meeting last December that I believe, Florian, you were at. And then this is the practices that we came up with, that research performing organizations such as universities, this is what we thought they should practice. Anyway, data sharing, open access publishing, prospective study registration, reporting guidelines, disclosures of interest and funding, and verification efforts. And I hope, Florian, you will get a manuscript in a couple of weeks. We just finished speaking with the Center for Open Science last week on this, so we're moving good. The issue is probably going to be implementation, and how can we get organizations to participate. So we're going to invite several groups. So, for example, in Canada, there's a group called the U15, which is what they call the research intensive universities. This is it's not evidenced. They simply decided to call themselves that, and they allow 15 universities in the country. And we're going to ask them whether they would take a webinar about this And maybe there's something in France we could do, an organization we could speak to. We're also going to speak to a group called Helios, which is a group of now about 75 US institutions that are interested in changing their research assessment. So I wanted to just talk for a moment a little bit about study transparency to report through reporting guidelines, because I know a little bit about that. And so here's an example of a randomized trial, the use of a randomized trial, the use of the consort statement in a randomized trial to see whether it improves the quality of reporting. Indeed, it does. And there's other evidence for other types of reporting guidelines. So there is some evidence to use. And so in terms of your research performing organization, your universities, what could you do? You could explicitly declare that using reporting guidelines is important and valued by the institution. My institution doesn't do that, but maybe your institution would be interested in doing that. There are institutions in Canada that do that, and they're obviously more progressive. And as part of the assessment, you could say the use of reporting guidelines will be used as part of the faculty members' assessment process. So there's ways of implementing all of this. And so we also, in this work we're doing, we realize that there's no single way to get research organizations to do this, because research organizations are all different from one another, and they may need some sort of modular adoption to how to promote better, more evidence-based research assessment of their faculty and staff. And there are also some policy issues, and there's, as I said, there's probably not one single way of doing that. But we hope to really be able to push this out in 2026 and try to engage groups of organizations that universities belong to. At the end of the day, I was recently in Berlin talking about research assessment and knowing how people are doing. And I think one of the problems, I think, with the biomedicine is that, people feel, oh, these people have lots of degrees, they must be very smart, they must know how to do everything. And, well, that may be true, but of course it may be false. The only way you're going to find that out is if you monitor what's going on, and if you have dashboards that can monitor even open access or whatever the metadata can help you with that. I think that's going to be very, very important. And if you look, when I was in Germany, they were all laughing at me, but I was saying, go to YouTube and have a look at some of the Birkenstock sandals and how they're manufactured and all the quality assurance processes they have along the way. We don't do that in biomedicine. To know whether any of our policies are implemented or having impact, and I think that's unfortunate. It's a shame. So, how would you pay for this? And I think a model that's worth thinking about is the Human Genome Project, and they put 1% of their budget into the ethical, legal, and social implications research program, which I think by any measure has had an enormous payoff. And the question is whether research performing organizations should do something similar to improve the behavior of their scientists and of science. I think that would be incredibly important. And that's just an end. It's a self-portrait, but thank you very much for your time. And I've probably done my thing today.